Hello everyone, my name is Joshua and this is the 161st video of my video journal series. Today's date is Sunday, the 19th of July, 2026. How's everyone been? I've been pretty good, thank you. And yes, the time has finally come for another Detective Conan movie review. Today I'll be giving my thoughts on Detective Conan Captured in Her Eyes. It's been a while since I've done a Detective Conan movie review. The last one I did was Wizard of the Century, which was a few weeks ago. I know it's a long time in the video journal sense, but yeah, I'm finally excited to sit on the couch and talk about this movie. I watched it today, and so far, I reckon this is the best movie I've watched. Now, mind you, it is the fourth film in the franchise, fourth film, and I heard other ones like Phantom of Baker Street also pretty good. But yeah, this one I can already rank in like one of my favorites, even though it had like a very complex and deep plot. I liked it. Um, and yeah, I'll be giving my thoughts, what I liked, what I disliked, and yeah. Obviously, this movie review will contain spoilers. I know it's a 26-year-old film, but I always got to put that disclaimer at the beginning. And it's not really a review; it's more like my thoughts on the film. I guess it's a review in like my personal sense, not like to be overtly critical. Because I'm not like a movie critic or anything. I'm someone who just likes watching films. But anyway, the plot revolves around a former surgeon who turned a psychiatrist because of a wrist injury and essentially decides to take out his anger on not only the person who caused him the wrist injury while he was operating on someone, but everyone in the Baker Police Department in the Detective Conan universe. And this plot reminds me of the last Detective Conan movie, the third one, where someone sustains an injury and decides to take out his anger on people close to him. But with this one, essentially, it's kind of interesting because Rand, who was one of the main characters in the Detective Conan franchise, actually witnesses the villain commit one of these murders, and obviously the villain doesn't want Rand to sort of spread the news. So there's also like the B plot. I call it the B plot, where the villain is actively trying to like kill Rand. And I know like the Detective Conan movies are dark, but this movie was on a whole nother level of like darkness. It very much delves into like dark themes of like obviously attempted murder. Um, and yeah, obviously, there is like the A plot of, Conan gang trying to find who the killer is, but also the B plot because Rand actually lost her memory after the villain tried to assassinate her life. Um, or, well, more specifically, the person who was next to Rand, and, obviously that made Rand a target, you know, um, because she's the only one who knows what the kill looks like, but then she got amnesia after that, attempted murder attempt. Um, and the B plot's essentially Rand trying to regain her memory throughout the film to recognize who the killer was. So basically, yeah, there are two plots going. Kind of reminds me actually a little bit of the first movie, how they were like um, the first movie was essentially like mini plots that sort of come into one at the end of the film. This one, you have like two ongoing plots. You got like a sort of movie inside of a movie. I know that's the incorrect term to use, but you got like two main things going on in this film. And they could be really like separate movies, come to think about it, but they decided to intertwine them, which I liked. Like sort of like two separate plots, the A and B plot. Makes it interesting. And obviously, it follows your standard who done it, like marking off all the suspects. And I'll say this movie, I really liked it because the plot was detailed. They always, put some twists in there. Obviously, my expectations of who the villain was were greatly subverted like midway through. I was like, oh, it could be this person. No, it's that person. Oh, it's that person, And once it's explained at the end of the movie, once Conan gives his spiel, it all starts to make sense. Yeah, but apart from that, like obviously the movie had like a very fast pace to it in my eyes. I don't want to keep on using that pun, because that's the title, captured in her eyes. Ran captured the murder in her eyes, and now she's the main target for the villain. Um, and obviously, I don't mind it. For me, like I had to like sort of pause at certain points in the movie so then I could just like process all that's happening in my brain. Just the plot. That's because I'm very slow when it comes to processing things. But yeah, the animation and soundtrack were good, and obviously, there were plot twists that actually made sense in the film, and those plot twists made the film more engaging, more interesting. I'm gonna go into a little bit of the cons here. And like in terms of the plot, obviously I said it was fast paced, but I felt like there were some you know things that were left sort of unanswered, or things that could have been elaborated on more clearly. Like I know one of the characters in the film is like a rock like a rock star, and he's the son of like a police chief or superintendent. I forgot the position. And they make it like seem that rock star rebel kid will be the killer. And he's only on screen for like less than around 5 minutes in the film. Um, but there's like this whole character arc where they mention him in the film. They identify him as a suspect, but he isn't a suspect. He isn't the one that committed the murders, obviously. But like that, like sort of plot line sort of remains unanswered. I'm like, why would they introduce this character? Include scenes of him throughout the film, but they don't really like elaborate more on his character. Like at least not in my eyes. Um, and obviously there were some other like small sort of you know character introductions or concepts that were just like introduced but not really like finished all that well. So yeah, like obviously has the groundworks for a very very good movie, and I argue it's a good movie. But there were some like things that sort of remained unanswered, or things that could have been clarified more clearly. And I guess like pacing as well. Like obviously they want to introduce a lot of things. The A and B plot, which sort of like coincide together to form the main, sort of objective. But I feel like the downside to that when you're trying to incorporate two very complex plots is that you have to make I guess the pacing of the movie faster to squeeze in a certain time frame. Um, and obviously that was just my main con. I just found the movie to be a little bit too fast paced. Some things were, could have been clarified better, or some things remained unanswered. Um, but I did like in the beginning of the movie how they like sort of set it up the story. Shinichi and Ran at the Tropic Land amusement theme park, and the water fountain as well. I thought that was a very good sort of thing to establish at the beginning of the movie, then at the end of the movie, that water fountain ends up saving their lives. And obviously, yeah, if I just had to focus a little bit more on the plot, because that was one of my main sort of criticisms, um, like at least in terms of pacing the plot, that was my criticism. The actual plot of the movie is really interesting. Um, but yeah, when it just comes to pacing, I think, it's a little bit all too much you know, and certain things just flew over my head when I was watching the movie. But at the end, when they like, um, when they did flashbacks, right, when Conan gave his spiel on why this person's the murderer, I'm like, oh yeah, I missed that, you know. But I felt like I could have picked it up if the movie was just a little bit more slower. Um, but yeah, obviously, it is quite a dark movie, like and you're trying to like, you know, sort of pick up the clues throughout the movie. Like the serial killer is left-handed. And you look at all the left-handed characters, saying, "All right, which one can it be?" And the like plot twist, right? Because they test all the suspects and they find no gunpowder on the suspects, so that adds some confusion. But then it's realized that the killer made this mechanism. They cut out a hole in an umbrella. They held up the umbrella towards like their chest, like almost in a defense position. And they put the gun barrel through the umbrella, so when they shoot the gun, the umbrella protects them from gunpowder. So hence why they can't be tested, and it's essentially like removing their fingerprint of the crime. Like fingerprint in the sense that obviously they can't use that sort of sample of gunpowder on them because the umbrella blocked all of it. So yeah, I found that like sort of plot twist to be intriguing. Um, and obviously, the B plot of Ram trying to regain her memory, and she regains her memory at the end of the film, or starts to come back to her because of her amnesia. And I found, obviously that to be important because she's the one who noticed the killer, and they're like trying to protect Ran, Shinichi's girlfriend, whilst also trying to get information out of her, trying to like re-jog her memory. So it adds like an extra layer of you know, what would you call it? Pressure, throughout the film. Another thing. But apart from that, yeah, like I really, really like this movie. So far, it's my favorite. That's most likely to change when I watch the other ones, but I'll put it in like my top five or maybe even top three Conan films. Um, and yeah, is there anything else I can talk about this movie that I haven't really talked about? Not really. Um, Obviously, I've heard some other similar criticisms online when I guess it comes to like pacing and small things left unanswered or things that could have I guess been built upon like the whole rock star thing and the fact that I guess they try to introduce a lot of things but then they sort of like run out of time at the end. But I think just focusing on what really holds up this movie is the fact that they try to keep it interesting, impressive animation, impressive soundtrack, and the fact that you got the A and the B plot essentially sort of intertwining in a very good way. A lot of movies I watch, even like non-anime related films, whenever they have like an A and B plot, they're like sort of separate and they don't really intertwine all that well. You're like, how does the B plot relate to the A plot? But this movie keeps those A and B plots intertwined, and the B plot is actually important towards the story. And something about Detective Conan movies is that they like to reveal the villain at the end. It follows that formula, of revealing the villain at the end. Um, you can sort of pick up who's the villain like the three-fourths of the way through the film. Um, maybe around 30 minutes before the film ends, sort of thing. If you're really, really astute, you can actually most probably pick up who the villain is, like maybe halfway through the movie. Um, discounting the fact that you maybe watched the movie prior. But I feel like if you give it a watch again, you can most probably pick it up very early. And obviously they like to show the villain doing the crimes, but it's not the actual villain's face. It's just like a generic face or disguise that they use. Yeah, so they just basically whenever they depict the villain earlier on in the film, they just show this default shadowy figure, which is I guess like a recurring thing in the Conan movies. Because obviously they don't want to spoil who the villain is, but they need to show the villain doing the crimes. So they just show like this dark sort of figure. If you watch Detective Conan, you will know what I'm talking about. And obviously, it follows that same structure of the previous Detective Conan movies. Introduction, something happens, climax, villain gets caught, all that. But this was done in a very good way. It didn't really feel repetitive. It felt engaging and obviously the plot of the surgeon turned psychiatrist, essentially wanting revenge on the police department, and slowly eliminating people who could be a witness to his crime or people who have caused them great trouble. That's the simplest way I could put the plot of this movie. I recommend you go check out the Wikipedia page or wiki because the movie has like a very sort of like detailed plot. If I were to fully explain this movie, this video will be like longer than it is. And but yeah, essentially, I found this movie, yeah, just to be engaging. Its plot twists were, especially the one with like the gun and the umbrella, and the killer's like left-handed and all that, were really engaging, and it really got me thinking, um, about who the killer might be. And Yeah, I'll highly recommend you go check out this movie. Obviously, I have been watching these movies on the TMS YouTube page, but whenever the new ones uploaded, they just like privatize. So they don't privatize. So they make private the previous um, e- video or movie. You know, they don't privatize in the sense of you know, making something public private. Um, Actually, is that what you call it? When you private a video on YouTube, do you call it privatize or do you just call it like it's privated? I'll just call it privated because you know, we're not talking about economics here. Yeah, they private the movie before, so obviously when I talk about these movies, you can't really watch them, but there's always going to be, I guess, at least one streaming platform that has the Detective Conan movies, or maybe you know you have a DVD or Blu-ray of this film. But yeah, I recommend if you ever get the chance to watch it, to give it a watch, even if you may not be interested in Detective Conan. It still makes for a good sort of murder mystery, and I guess you know, as for my final rating, um I'll most probably give it a, you know, I'll give it an 8 out of 10 in terms of enjoyment. You know, 8 out of 10 stars in terms of what I personally thought of this film. You know, my personal enjoyment, which is pretty high. I think that's most probably the highest score I've given for the Detective Conan films. But yeah, I really like this. Even though that, you know, I had some small little gripes with this film. I think the key one just yet again being that whole like rock star guy in the film who's, you know, portrayed as a suspect, and you know he's like, oh, he could be the killer, but then he isn't really like, you know, mentioned later on the film. Like there's like a scene of him with his band, they're like rocking out at the concert, and you know, they don't really, I guess, like elaborate more on his character. You know, which I was just like, all right, they introduce the character, but they don't really, you know, elaborate on him. You know, and I feel like, you know, there have been some movies I've watched in the theater, and I'm like, all right, well, this seems like a very interesting character, but then they don't really like elaborate on that character. You know, they don't really um, focus more on that character, and I think, oh, that's a little bit of a waste of potential. Um, you know, and sometimes, you know, when a lot of things are happening on screen, it kind of makes it like hard to follow, at least for me. But you know, I bet when I give this film a rewatch in the future, I'll be able to like, you know, obviously I know what the plot is, but I'll be able to like enjoy even more because you know, I can sort of follow along, and you know, that secondhand knowledge will be greatly useful um, for even like picking up the small little details. Like that's why I like rewatching films, because when you rewatch it, you pick up all the small details you didn't really notice on your first watch. And I think that greatly applies to not only just this film, but all the Detective Conan movies. They have infinite, um, you know, sort of, they have like a very good like rewatch value in the sense that, you know, you can rewatch and pick up clues earlier on in the film. Than usual. But anyway, yeah, thank you for watching. I know this may seem like a little bit of a short review. Um, I just basically gave my thoughts. You know, I saying that I like the movie. You know, here's some things that I think could be improved upon. And yeah, that's pretty much how these videos rock and roll. And yeah, today's Sunday. Obviously, I'm going to close this book. I'm actually going to physically close this book because I'm no longer going to talk about the movie. But yeah, today was pretty good. Apart from me watching the film, obviously, I don't mean that in a bad or negative way. I just mean like, you know, the rest of my day has been good. You know, obviously, when I was watching the film, my day was good. But yeah, the rest of my day was good. Obviously, you know, it's the end of the week. I don't have anything planned for tonight. And I don't really have much planned for next week. Yet again, I'm just going to transition to full time studying soon. And yeah, that means, you know, less time for, I guess, watching movies, but I want to keep this video journal series interesting. And yeah, hopefully I'll get more into reading books. You know, I've got a lot of books in my room that I really want to read, and maybe I should do more book reviews. Maybe. But yeah, again, if you watched till the end, thank you. And yeah, that's pretty much all my books closed. That's pretty much all I wanted to say today. But yeah, thank you all for watching. And I'll catch you all next time. Bye, see you, take care. Catch you all tomorrow.